A very good morning and welcome to a new episode of Ment. I'm Ritvika Gupta, and on the show today we'll be in conversation with Melissa Waggener Zorkin. She's the global CEO and founder of We Communications. Anant Rangaswami, editor of Ment, joins me today. Hi Anant.
Hello.
Anant, so you spoke to Melissa about the importance and the role of PR in marketing today. So what was the conversation about?
First, this was one of three conversations we had on the sidelines of Praxis, which is a PR forum. A few episodes ago, we spoke to Matthew Harrington from Edelman. Today, we speak to Melissa. Melissa talks to us about brand managers realizing that their brands are brands in motion nowadays. And there are conversations about brands and things that impact brands from within and without.
Right.
And therefore, the need for 360-degree communication. And PR increasingly playing a very important role in this communication. And she describes how PR now is back to having a seat at the table.
Right. Anant, how do you think the role of a communicator has changed over the years?
It was fairly static till about 15, 20 years ago in the pre-social media world or pre-digital world. And it's changed dramatically because earlier all communication was one way, you spoke to the consumer.
Yeah.
Now consumer talks to you, the brand, and talks about you when you're not even there in the conversation. So there are huge challenges of listening constantly to what is being said about your brand, getting into the conversation, navigating that conversation, diverting that conversation, and so on. So it's a complex world, and therefore the need for instant reaction in many instances. And instant cannot be done without the involvement of a PR firm.
All right, so let's have a look at the conversation. Let's get ready to melt with Melissa Waggener Zorkin.
Hello, Melissa.
Hello, how are you?
Welcome to India and good to talk to you.
Thank you very much.
So, in the 34 years that you've worked in this business, it's a long time. I've worked in this business also 34 years, so it's okay. Things have changed a lot. And today, as you say in your, I think, almost any lecture or interview, that today it's about 360 degrees. It's not about, one dot or two dots. You've got to join everything. So tell me, how have things changed for the role of the comms business vis-a-vis your brands?
Well, first of all, I would say that it's the best time to be in the communications business because we really have a seat at the table. And I know that CMOs and CCOs have got that view that CEOs really need and want and crave. And so that's really, really good for us because we have a chance to actually change behavior, to get people to accept new things and actually address issues head on. And so the role of the communicator is actually quite substantial in companies in terms of, how do we set direction? How do we need to show up? And the other piece of it, especially more today, is speaking truth to power. Being that, mirror back saying, if we do that, this is how it will be received, and we really should rethink that. And so,
can you give me an example of speaking truth to power?
I can. I think
sure.
that there are times when there are CEOs or people who are in positions of power, and they believe that they should be communicating a certain way. But what's true and important is that they actually have a chance to understand how will that be received. Ask people in advance, well, what do you think about this? How do you think that this will be, responded to? And active listening needs to happen so that the CEO has a chance to say, that's actually the direction we should go. And so I can think of many times when we've had difficult conversations with people where we have said, you should really think differently about this. We should really go a different direction. So let's say a product might be late. And instead of just saying, well, it will come out, what we should really be saying is perhaps we should say why it's late, perhaps we should say what the new plan is, and we should actually draw attention to that. So the transparency that's needed today in society, and we know that we will get shamed instantly if we're not honest and transparent, is something that is a big example in terms of speaking truth to power.
Right. You use the phrase active listening. What is active listening as opposed to listening? I mean, just help my viewers understand. Why do we have this adjective appended to it?
Active listening is really finishing listening.
Right.
Listening can be something that's very polite and genuine and taking in information from someone who's speaking at you or with you. Active listening means that you're sitting there saying, if you're going to explain this to me, I'll actually think about changing my mind. I will take action. I will do something about this. And so you think of an employee survey, let's say, and you receive it and you say, hey, we've heard from our employees that these things should be changed. If you don't change those things, you shouldn't have even asked the question to begin with, because people expect you to actually do something with the time they take to share something with you.
Right. The word transparency keeps popping up. It's come twice in this 5 minutes of conversation. So it's a question that I ask a lot of people in your business. Is transparency viable, true transparency, as all the experts say it's required? Is it viable from a return on investment point of view?
Oh, I absolutely think that transparency is a business tenet, is viable, and is something that helps business move forward.
And if any of these answers, if you can give us an illustration, a real live illustration of a brand you worked with perhaps, and a situation you've been in, it'll help.
Well, I think from a transparency perspective, there are many people in the technology industry who are putting products into the marketplace, and they're needing to move the user along a continuum. Let's take artificial intelligence as a big example. So where transparency comes in is the conversation around what truly will move forward as a result of this technology. Not what we guess will happen, not the fear mongering, not the things that could be, just speculation, but rather what is the true business problem we're trying to solve here, and being transparent about that. So it's absolutely viable, and it's really the way that I think all companies should behave.
Can a brand survive without transparency? Or how long, today many are. But is it possible, say 10 years from now? What's your view on that?
I suppose that there are some brands who could continue to not open up and talk about what's at the heart of their company, but I would push back and say that the employees, if nothing else, will get to the bottom of what's really happening. And your employees are your most important, stakeholders. And so I guess I would say the answer is no, but I imagine that there are a few out there that we could look at and say that they.
Your advice to them would be transparent, or you're in trouble.
My advice to all brands really is to start with a purpose, make sure you're true to that, make sure everyone knows that, and make sure that you're speaking about everything that you do well, but also everything that you need to improve. And I do think that that is what your shareholders want, which is just now a small fraction, because you now look at all stakeholders, not just shareholders. We're in business for many other reasons besides just our shareholders.
Sure.
And that's what the stakeholders are demanding.
So one of the key stakeholders that you talk about is the employee as a stakeholder.
Oh.
And you talk about advocacy. Now, advocacy programs are not very common in India, at least yet, employee advocacy programs. So tell me why it's important for firms to embrace employee advocacy.
Our employees basically are who we are, and they're the people who will carry out the decisions that are made, and they will make decisions themselves. And if they're not united around what the company believes in, and they're not on that same mission, then obviously the company won't be as successful. And it's incredibly important to hear from them too, because they have talent. Talent doesn't just come from one place in the organization, talent comes from everywhere. And so if you think about where ideas come from to move a company forward, if each person has a voice, it's a much stronger company.
Right. And do you run advocacy programs for your clients as well?
So
So it gets a little hazy. Who runs the program? Is it the comms consultant? Is it HR through some other consultant? So do you run programs yourself?
Well, I would step back and say that employee engagement can happen in many ways, and does. And it's all in partnership, really. And I would say all of communications really operates that way too, that you have a strong agency role and a strong internal organization, and that's when you have, the strongest communications programs. But for internal communications, yes, very often we'll get called upon to take a look at what do we really need to do to be sure that our employees understand our direction, understand when there's an issue, how we will behave, and certainly when things when they're activists about something, we need to listen to them and reach out, and that's also where we would get involved. So it's a partnership, as is any part of the communications cycle.
Right. The world was very static as far as brands are concerned, and there were no conversations between the consumer and brands 25 years ago. Today, you keep talking about the mobile world, and everything is real. it's coming at you from places you don't even expect it. Now tell me, how does the consultant gear himself or the company to being ready for a crisis to occur any moment, and how does the company handle it? How do they gear themselves? Because there have to be an SOP, which it wasn't required 20 years ago.
Well, brands are in motion
Right.
way more than they were, of course, and the world is in motion, so that is exponentially on top of a brand being in motion and evolving. I think the most important thing, though, to think about is, where in that conversation do you actually start the conversation? And, how do you really move it along, even if it's not something you would have done before?
Right. So there's a new agility that's required, which wasn't required earlier.
I think that's very true, but I also think that many of the tenets, the basic tenets, are the same. Build a relationship. Think about trust. Trust is the most important thing here. And if brands are in motion all the time, what are the different things you should do? And so for us, we have really three things. Lead with your purpose, lead with personal conviction, think about respect in a completely new way, 360 degrees of respect, and then probably most importantly is this idea that if you have global aspirations, the only way really that you're going to be able to move that forward is to, in a local community or in a local setting, prove, not just talk, prove that this is really what you mean and what the global initiative is. And so I think that there are new ways to act agile, to be nimble. From a crisis perspective, you walk yourself through all the worst things that could happen, and you should be ready for every one of those. But the best plan goes right off the shelf when something happens. And so instantaneous need to jump into communications and say, we must be present in this situation. We don't hide from it. We don't wait till we're perfect. We immediately respond to, in a thoughtful way, hey, we hear you, we're talking about it, here's our response. And it's very important.
Even from an organization structure, for example, let's say a crisis hits a brand on Twitter at 6 a.m. on a Saturday. You can't wait till Monday to solve the problem or get into the conversation or try and guide the conversation.
You can't wait till Monday. I would not want you to wait till Sunday. I would let you wait an hour. No, that's even too long of a time.
How do you get geared to handle that, and how does your client side get geared? I can even understand you're getting geared. Clients go off to play golf on Friday. So how do you deal with problems like that?
Oh, I don't play golf.
No, you don't. No, you don't. That's what on this side it's okay. On the other side, on the client side.
I think you're asking a really great fundamental question, but I think it all comes down to what partnership does an agency have with their clients.
Right.
And you ought to be alongside in every moment, peaks and valleys, and we are. That's a core tenet of our company, is that, we need to understand the business problem just as well, and we need to be there right in the moment 24/7. So we've built all kinds of approaches where in the moment we can respond. And we have, from an analytics standpoint, we have real-time analytics where we totally, from every geography, understand what's happening and where it will go next. And that's where analytics are so important, to understand where these things happen, and then in real time, how can you respond?
Right. One of the words you use now is purpose, and it's a word I trip upon every second day. Sometimes talking to people like you, sometimes talking to people in advertising, sometimes talking to marketers. And one of the things I see is a lot of time there's a sort of force fit of purpose onto a product or a brand. So how do you guard yourself against, just slapping on a purpose on something which is not credible from the consumer's point of view?
I imagine that there are companies today who are trying on various purposes.
Right.
And I actually think that's a start.
Even if it is fake?
Well, no, not if it's fake. But
Right.
again, if it's, let's have a conversation about what we really should stand for, and they may not get it right to begin with. I think that's a start. For me, though, there are exercises, and our agency does this, where we can say, how do you start at the start and fundamentally, from your soul, create the right purpose? Why do we do what we do? Engage stakeholders like the employees into the conversation early on, and then understand what truly will come out of that. And so there's probably a number of ways to come into the conversation around purpose. And it used to be CSR, it used to be philanthropy. Now it's basically fundamentally, what is the strategy and the purpose of the company from the very, from the very top, the core.
So one of the things I've believed in for a long time is that there's a problem that we are facing in the whole comms business with short-termism. everything is short term, and nobody's thinking of what will happen 3 years from now or 5 years from now. Most of your consultancy and advice is basically a long term broken up into many short terms. How do you react to that? Don't you need more time to engage with your consumers, to understand the consumer and make things happen for your client?
The process of change, which is really what brands want to have happen in the customer journey, does take a long time. And I do think that there are moments where we need to sit down with clients and educate them on the value of staying power of a certain kind of work that needs to be done. And purpose is actually one of those things. You cannot just come out and say, this is our purpose and be done. And so that's an example of, if you truly want to show the change that you're aspiring to, there are a lot of, as you said very well, little steps along the way that we just have to keep reinforcing. And there will be missteps sometimes, but that end goal, that epic that we're building, not the little episodes, is what's important. And so we generally say to a client, please work with us to build the epic and where you're headed and what you want to be known for, rather than work on every single episode.
Right. We're also seeing this phenomenon of regular pitches for business. Brands put out, you change the CMO and he changes the everything. He changes the creative agency, media agency, PR agency. Now, coming from somebody like you who's worked with Microsoft for 34 years, and that's a long time. Tell me, why is that so important that you have a long relationship with a brand? Forget benefit to yourself. How does it benefit the brand? That they have a continuity in this relationship.
I do want to point out with a company like Microsoft that I say every day, if we don't earn it, we won't have it.
Sure.
And you do behave like there's always an RFP,
right,
even if there's not.
Right.
But when you're in a trusted advisor role and you can speak that truth to power and they rely on you for that resilience and that honesty, then generally speaking, it's a much easier relationship. But I would never say that you don't have to earn it every single day.
Sure.
And for the client, the benefits of that, basically that they, in an honest fashion, understand how something that they're doing from a business decision will actually translate. And the more important thing is that if really you want the company to be the story that they want to tell, you have a lot of, at the front end, conversation around strategy, where you're going and how you're getting there. And so that's a benefit to a client, because then a client knows you're at the heart of solving a fundamental business problem.
Right. Now, one of the things about brands being in motion, one of the downsides is the amount of fake news that envelopes brands as well. We didn't see that perhaps in the early days of Twitter or whatever. Today we're seeing that. So how do you advise clients to deal with crises like that? Because these are crises that get born in milliseconds. I think you've seen that with McDonald's every now and then. It just pops up. Somebody does it, perhaps competition, perhaps just a consumer.
The fake news genie is not going to get back in the bottle.
Right.
And it is what it is. And I think that that means our own discernment is more important than ever before in terms of checking what do we really believe in, what do we really act on, and making sure that what we're seeing is the truth. And so it does put something back on us. But I was talking to a student the other day who's only 19 years old, and I said, how do you deal with fake news? And she said to me, I guess I just have to be more careful before I actually do something with what I read.
Right.
That says it all to me, right there.
From a student.
From a student, 19 years old.
So, okay, now I'm going to end with something I want you to think about it before you answer. You speak about brands in motion and the challenges of today. Have the clients changed enough to understand that brands are in motion, or clients still in a world where they think that brands are static?
I think it's hard to actually put all brands in one category.
Basket, sure.
I think that there are many who are incredibly sophisticated and understand very well that they need to change in different ways, and that they are moving at light speed, and they are very open to being nimble, very open to change, and very open to trying things and then moving on if it doesn't work. I think there are some others who actually have to work a little bit harder within their own organization to let change happen. But yes, I think in general you have business leaders who want good things to happen. And so they want to keep up, and they really, really want to move their brand forward. And there's just new tenets these days now in terms of how you really create the new brand loyalty. And it's actually focused on different things perhaps than 10 years ago that they might have been more used to.
We started this conversation talking about the comms business getting a seat at the table with the CMO and the CXO. What is the role of the CEO today? The more that brands get in motion, the more some hard decisions have to be taken on the fly. Does the average CEO have to get more involved in brands? What's your experience? Do you talk to CEOs more often today than you did 15 years ago?
We've always had, as an agency, the opportunity and honor to work with many CEOs. I would say that there are more of them now looking at the role that communications should play in their organization, and certainly being more nimble about making sure that that's a chief part of what they do as well. I don't think there's any CEO today that cannot be thinking about how they show up, what they stand for, and how they're leading the organization, and they would tell you that too. But what's fundamentally different today is that they need to spend more time actively listening to what does our employee base really think, so that actually those people, when the CEO is talking, look at that and say, I'm proud to be part of that. So the CEO knows that communications is part of their job, is to be that voice. But I would end by saying that I don't think leadership is just the CEO's job at all. I think leadership is everywhere in the company, from the person who just walked in the door to the person who's been there 2 years, 5 years, 20 years, and that's what we really need to look for.
Fantastic. I've been actively listening to you. I hope our viewers are actively watching and actively listening. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for the opportunity, and thank you for all that you do.
And well, that was the conversation. Anant, what do you think marketers can take away in terms of how they can improve their communication strategies?
I think many marketers are like a deer caught in the headlights. They know there's a problem and they freeze and they do nothing about it. This conversation underlines the need for them to be not only staying aware that there's a problem, but addressing the problem. This is an elephant in the room. It's both in India and abroad. I think it'll get worse. And it's going to be very, very important for marketers to stay acutely aware of what is being said about them.
All right. With that, it's a wrap on this episode of Melt. You can watch all our content on our social media platforms. Our handle is Ready to Melt. And I'll see you next week, same time, same place. Goodbye.